Good evening, everybody. My name is Brendan Baylott. I'm the president of the Wisconsin Underwater Archaeology Association. Welcome to our first of many, hopefully, podcasts that we'll be doing monthly called Submerged History. Um, this series should be focused on sort of Midwest regional underwater archaeology and things that lie not just under the Great Lakes. We're not just going to talk about maritime archaeology, but we'll also talk about riparian archaeology, inland lakes, sites all over our region. And we'll be bringing in guests to you that are doing exciting and interesting work in those areas. So before we jump in, I'm just going to do a little bit of housekeeping. The Wisconsin Underwater Archaeology Association is a citizen science organization um, that is comprised primarily of avocational or interested people who support underwater archaeology in Wisconsin, but also of many professional archaeologists as well who participate in our organization. For those of you who are not familiar with us, we are about 35 years old. We started as a result, in some ways, of the passage of the Abandoned Shipwreck Act, which dumped about 1,000 historic ships in the state's lap and entrusted them with their care. And so we were started sort of as a volunteer corps to help the state um, properly document and conserve those resources. And since then, we've branched out into a number of different areas. And we continue to be a fairly vital organization. We hold two events each year. We have our Underwater Archaeology and Maritime History Symposium in the fall, which is being held in Milwaukee at the Midwest Archaeology Conference this fall. And then we have also the Go Ships Festival, which we hold in March in Manitowoc, which focuses strictly on maritime archaeology, which is our larger event. So if you're interested in joining us, please check out our website, WUAA.org. We have a number of different fieldwork projects we do each year. We have some excellent ones planned for this season. We have a number of great publications, including our journal, Wisconsin's Underwater Heritage, which comes out twice a year. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our inaugural guest. Really happy that Dr. Ashley Lemke chose to accept our invitation. Ashley is a professor at my alma mater, the University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee, where I spent 13 years and only came out with 2 degrees. I spent all my time up there in the Golden Meyer Library in the map collection, and I took so many classes I probably could have gotten a number of different degrees, but at that time college was cheap. In any event, Dr. Lemke specializes in and has surveyed a lot of submerged sites in the Great Lakes associated with early hunter-gatherer cultures. She's also worked in terrestrial archaeology in continental Europe, in Romania, Spain, and Germany, but is, I think, best known for her impressive work on the Lake Huron ridge, which I'm sure we'll hear some about. So Ashley, thank you so much for joining us. Before we get going, I know a lot of our members, particularly our maritime archaeology folks, might not know much about you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? How'd you get involved in archaeology, and what led you to this interest in submerged history?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be in the state of Wisconsin now. So I was that kid that always watched the History Channel when I was growing up. I didn't always watch cartoons. I was just really fascinated by history, particularly of the classical world, like Egypt and Greece and Rome. And then when I went to school, I got introduced to anthropology as a degree and a field of study. And I started digging in Texas. I worked at a mammoth kill site with Clovis hunter-gatherers who had killed a mammoth and, with stone tool technology. And I just thought it was the most fascinating thing. So I started out in anthropology and kind of went all the way with my BA and my master's and my PhD, and have now worked on land and underwater both. And have made my way back to the Great Lakes in the Midwest, where I've done a lot of my research most recently.
Excellent. Well, we're really pleased that you're here because we've had, let's say, a lack of sort of underwater archaeology in academia here in Wisconsin, and you've been a real breath of fresh air for us. So tell
Thank
us a
you.
little bit about what we're looking at here, Ashley.
Yeah, so this image is one of a really series of images that were taken by Tawny Casserly. Is he works for the NOAA National Marine Sanctuary, and this is actually Wayne Lasardi. Many of our members might remember him from the excellent talk he just gave at Ghost Ships. And what you're looking at is the bottom of Lake Huron and about 85 feet of water here. And it's a feature that's called the Alpena Amberley Ridge. It ran from Alpena in Michigan to Amberley over in Ontario. And it was a dry land bridge that would have had people living on it, animals migrating across it, a lot of different plants growing there at the end of the Ice Age around 9,000 years ago. So, myself and John O'Shea from the University of Michigan and an amazing team of collaborators and researchers have worked together to investigate this lost feature and see what kind of archaeological sites might be found there. And I wanted to include this picture of Wayne because he's mapping one of the first archaeological sites that was found on the Alpena Amberley Ridge, or the AAR. And this is a cluster of stones that's referred to as the Dragon Blind. Archaeologists and scientists always have these really unique names for everything, right? So this one's called the Dragon Blind because just out of the frame, there's a long, kind of sinuous trail of stones that would have been used to hunt probably migrating caribou. So caribou would have been out on this landform. Again, it's kind of the end of the last ice age, would have been really cold, probably subarctic-like environment. And ancient peoples knew that caribou were attracted to straight lines. So they built these features out of the abundant stone that was in the environment. And some of them you can see were clustered together, kind of rectangle shapes. Some of them are circular. Some of them are V-shaped structures. And many of them we think were used for hunting blinds. So if you think of deer hunting now, right, you're out in your wooden structure. But in the past, they would use stone for a lot of these structures. So this is one of the first ones that was discovered. It kind of gave us a hint of what might be found and what might preserve underneath Lake Huron. And we go down and we do archaeology just like we would do it on land, where you're mapping everything in great detail. And then you even start excavating and looking for artifacts at these types of sites.
That's really, really interesting to me. I wondered always, sort of like the Doggerland finds off of England, where people got the idea to look there because fishermen were bringing up human artifacts in their nets. Uh, did you guys were artifacts found out here, and that's what attracted people to this, or did you kind of think, well, the water levels were low enough back then, we should probably look there, and then you went out and looked and found things? Which
Yeah,
is that how it happened?
yeah, it's the later one. So there's artifacts that have been found, but they were found after the fact. So the idea was, like, a lot of archaeologists and other scientists and peoples too knew that the water levels were lower in the past in the Great Lakes. And everyone had this sense of, like, we're missing some of the picture. We're missing some of the sites from these time periods. So John O'Shea started this project with Guy Meadows, who's at Michigan Tech College now, Michigan Tech. And they went out there and they just were like, you know what? We've all been talking about it for years. Like, let's see if we can find anything.
Wow. And so they did.
And so they did, yeah.
Fascinating. So here's another one out there. Tell us a little about this.
Yeah, so this is my very good friend and colleague. This is Tyler Schultz from Michigan, and he's been working with us. He's a volunteer, just like a lot of members of WUAA, and he's been working on this project since the very beginning. And what he's doing is taking a sample of an ancient peat bog that is preserved on the Alpena Amberley Ridge below Lake Huron. So people might be familiar with like the bog bodies in Europe, where these archaeological sites and human remains are preserved in bogs. And this is a peat bog that radiocarbon dated to 9,000 years old. So this was formed when the ridge was dry land. It's sort of leaf litter, there's seeds in it, there's a lot of environmental evidence. And we just found this three summers ago. And it was funny because we had multi-beam sonar of the area. And there was this kind of rocky, what we thought was a rocky ridge. And we went to go check out the target that we assumed was a stone line. You know, we found a lot of stone lines there that are these hunting features. And when Tyler and the other divers went down there, they picked up what we thought were rocks, and they were not rocks. They were peat, these mats of kind of material, like vegetable, like plant material, which is really fascinating. So for us as archaeologists, when you want to understand past environments, this is like one of the best lines of evidence you can find, because it's not just pollen, but there's pollen in it, but there's preserved leaves and reeds and the seeds of these plants that are likely going to preserve ancient DNA as well. So on the Alpena Amberley Ridge, it's not an easy place to work by any means. Like anybody who works in the Great Lakes knows this, but it's really worth it. It's worth the effort to go out there and be far offshore and go in deep water and cold water, because the preservation is so good. So when I worked on sites on land, you know, we're really fortunate if we have a small little piece of charcoal or a small, you know, little piece of a plant that was burned. But on the bottom of Lake Huron and other lakes too in the area, there's submerged forest where tree stumps are preserved. You know, the trees themselves are still rooted. So this peat bog is a really fascinating discovery. We're still working on it. This picture is Tyler taking one of the very first samples of the peat bog, so we could bring it up to the boat and see exactly what we were dealing with. So this discovery is one of the newer ones from the Alpena Amberley Ridge, and it shows you how collaborative these projects are, because we have folks that are going to do the environmental DNA. There are individuals who are going to look at the plant remains so they can say what kind of plants they are. They can identify them. There's the archaeologists, of course, who are getting these samples. There's volunteers that are helping us out with the research. So this is really going to change our understanding of ancient environments in the Great Lakes, because those cold, fresh waters preserve peat bogs like this so well.
One of the things that you and I have talked about is the possibility of some material like this being over here on Lake Michigan. And of course, we don't have a nice, shallow ridge. Our mid-lake plateau was, I think, just a little bit too deep to be exposed. But this spring, I hope to go out with Noah to do some sampling examination of these giant circular features we've found on the bottom of Lake Michigan in the deep portions. And I'm trying to, my suspicion is that they're hydrocarbon events, something biological under the lake bottom, hydrocarbons. And it's pretty deep, but it could be peat.
Yeah, right.
Thing. But we'll see. So let's see. This is an interesting one. This looks like chert or flint.
Yeah, so these are obsidian, actually. So it's volcanic glass. But these are some of the artifacts that were found below Lake Huron on the Alpena Amberley Ridge at one of these hunting sites. So there's numerous stone tools and debris that have been recovered. And these are some of the most interesting because they're tiny. So that scale that's in the middle is 2 millimeters. So these are really small. And as archaeologists, sometimes it's like the smallest, littlest artifact that has the biggest story to tell. So these are clearly evidence of human manufacture. They have a lot of the features that we look for as archaeologists, that we know humans broke these rocks, right? It's not any natural forces that could have created these. So we know that they're artifacts. They were found in an archaeological site. And there's a graduate student who's working on the project, Brendan Nash, And he saw these materials, and we were kind of like, maybe this is chert, it's not the distinctive kind of dark black that a lot of obsidian is. He's like, I think this is obsidian. So again, we worked with a big collaborative team and used a lot of different methods to geochemically source this rock. Like, where is the raw material coming from? And these two artifacts that were found below Lake Huron, they source to an obsidian source in Oregon, in eastern Oregon. So it's a distance of over 4,000 kilometers that these pieces of obsidian were from Oregon, but they eventually made their way to the Great Lakes. So we don't think this is, evidence of one person who walked all the way across North America, right, 9,000 years ago and then walked back. Instead, this is likely indicating trade and exchange networks that were already in place, right, well before social media or all of these things we think of today, that peoples at the end of the last ice age had connections that spanned far and wide, and they were trading these materials. Obsidian is a really great raw material. It's a really good stone for crafting stone tools because it's a glass. It's very sharp. And fortunately for us, they have really unique signatures because they only come from these volcanic sources. You can look at the elemental composition of the rocks and pinpoint them exactly to the source that they came from. So these are tiny flakes. They're evidence of someone probably sharpening a knife, that they were kind of waiting by their hunting blind, waiting for some animals to come, sharpening their knife, getting their tools prepared. And they left behind these little traces for us to find.
That's truly an amazing find from Oregon,
Mm-hmm.
bottom of Lake Huron. And about how long ago would these have been deposited there, do you think?
These would have dated right around 9,000 years ago. So the depth of the find can give us a relative age, right? So how deep it is, we can kind of correlate that to ancient lake levels. But we also do have radiocarbon dates from things like the submerged forest that are there and the submerged stumps, and then the peat give us actual absolute dates that are all, they're right around like 8,900 to 92, around that ballpark.
Well, and so I have to ask, how did Brendan see something this small and say, I'm going to pick that up and look at it underwater with scuba gear on?
Yeah, so he found it in the lab, but the archaeologists, the folks, the divers, when they recovered it, so we all know, right? There's zebra mussels, there's invasive species of mussels that cover, every hard surface on the lake, including the Alpena Amberley Ridge and the hunting structures themselves. So a lot of our samples we excavate, we put everything in a bucket, we bring the bucket to a surface using a lift bag, and then we excavate it, we screen it in the lab. But these ones are actually, it's even a funnier story. We were taking these little tiny samples in 100 milliliter plastic vials for pollen and environmental evidence. And our environmentalist found them in the lab. They're like, this environmental sample actually has really interesting archaeological data in it.
That's amazing stuff. I just love that when the biologists and the biological experts look at these ancient pollens, ancient seeds, and identify them. That type of environmental stuff has always been interesting to me, just because the world has changed quite a bit. Some different
Mm-hmm.
things were growing in that time. So this is, I heard you talk about this once before, and I thought this was one of the coolest things to demonstrate that something comes from like 4,000, came from 4,000 miles away
Yeah.
9,000 years ago. Um, all right. So what's this one?
This is like a little like self promotion, but I thought this would be good because, of course, I'm dressed in my new University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee outfit. But I wanted to introduce you all to Jake. So this is my robot counterpart. Jake is a remotely operated vehicle. He's a critical member of the research team, and he's got Milwaukee colors already, which is just great. So the thing that I wanted to talk about is some of the technology that we use, to first find these sites in the first place and then investigate them, because most of the sites on the Alpena Amberley Ridge are between 80 and 120 feet deep. So it's not shallow water diving by any means. Most of the archaeological sites are also between 35 and 50 miles offshore. So we're right in the middle of Lake Huron. And there's technical diving aspects of this, but you're limited in terms of your bottom time of just how long you can be down there. So what we've done is to leverage a lot of subsea technologies to have a really good sense of what these archaeological sites look like, where are they, how are they structured, so we have a really good idea of exactly where we're going to take the samples. And to do that, we use Jake. So we sent him down first. Jake's a robot. He doesn't get cold. He doesn't need oxygen. He can stay down there all day long. And he has a couple of different payloads, we call them, that really help us document these sites. So he has a forward-looking camera, a backward-looking camera, a forward-looking sonar, and a pinging or locating sonar. So he has his location immediately. It pings up into the boat. So we know exactly where he is in GPS coordinates below water. And then he has 2 lasers on the front, which help us get a sense of scale of these features and sites. So the remotely operated vehicle is kind of the first line, or the first wave of archaeologists that go underwater, kind of, because we use Jake to ground truth targets we see on the sonar. So if you see something interesting on the sonar, you can go down, you can get live video from the remotely operated vehicle. You can get a sense like, do we think this is an archaeological site or not? And then when divers go and take samples, Jake is, the dive buddy. He's the other dive buddy that's there, that's recording video of the entire dive. So we have a good record of where all the samples came from using that GPS capability. And you have a video record of where all the samples came from. And then using the sonar that's on the remotely operated vehicle, you also have a good map of the site. So it's kind of a built-in safety feature. It's our kind of documentation feature. And then it's just our buddy, right, that really helps us conduct a lot of our research. So I'm Jake's pilot. That's a lot of the work that I do when we're out on the boat, is sort of the top side aspect of having the ROV and then monitoring the sites and then the diving and the sampling that's happening.
So is Jake a custom built ROV, or is Jake a commercially purchased ROV?
Jake is mostly off the shelf. So he's an Outland 1000. Outland technology is based out of Louisiana. So most of it is off the shelf, and then those sonars were added later. The lasers were added later. So he's kind of been customized for the research.
I ask because WUAA is currently on the market. We're looking at an ROV package to complement our side scan sonar capabilities, and probably nothing like this.
There's a lot, there's a lot of ROVs. They come in many different shapes and sizes, and it just depends on what you're trying to do.
Yeah. For us, it's mostly looking at shipwreck remains, not necessarily in real deep water, but it's a fascinating capability to have. Let's move along, and this is an interesting one. That looks to me like an autonomous underwater vehicle.
Yes. So this is another one I wanted to show for, the technology side of things and how all of this kind of builds together. So this is an autonomous underwater vehicle. It belongs to Michigan Tech, and this is our team retrieving it to bring it back on the boat. So the wonderful thing about autonomous underwater vehicles is they can just fly by themselves, right? So as opposed to traditional, towed side scan sonar, where it's on the boat, you're watching the feed live. In this case, they're completely untethered. That's the autonomous part. You can program them a survey pattern, and they can get closer to the bottom oftentimes than you can with a traditional towed sonar. So this AUV, I used it first in my dissertation research, and then we've used it out on the ridge a number of times. It flies 5 meters above the bottom, above the lake bed, and does these really tight, what we call micro regions. So they're rectangles that are 1 kilometer by 0.5 kilometer, that it goes back and forth, mows the lawn just by itself. and brings side scan sonar maps back. You download it later, and then you get these really nice images because they're so close to the bottom that the resolution is really, really good in the side scan. So the AUVs really helped us understand the spatial patterning of these different hunting sites, because it's not just one hunting site that's below Lake Huron. There's 30 of them that are across the Alpena Amberley Ridge. And so this technology has really given us a good sense of those relationships. Like, are some of the structures used together? Are they far apart? Are they close together? Are they all facing the same way? You know, are they oriented to get animals that are all migrating in the same direction or not? And, you know, the AUVs are great. The more experience we have with these, we kind of let them be more autonomous every year, because you start convincing yourself it's really going to come back, which is great. In this case, this is an Ivor. It's an Ivor AUV, and it's a size that we can hand deploy it off of our 25-foot research vessel. So both the Outland, the Jake, the remotely operated vehicle, and then this Ivor AUV has been really great for us because they're small, hand deployable assets where you don't need, you know, a massive research vessel with a huge crane, although you sometimes want them. In this case, we can do a lot of the work just off the same research platform, the same, you know, very small boat, and get these really great results from these different technologies.
The AUV is a particularly cool thing. Interesting that you mentioned Michigan Tech. That's one of my other alma maters. Before I went to
Okay.
Milwaukee, I went to Michigan Tech because I had to. My dad was a professor there for 40 years, and the Agassiz was they just got that in there. Maybe oh, 15, 10, 10, 15 years, maybe 20 years ago. And Stephen Robley, the captain, is a good friend. And I got to go out and see a lot of these technologies, including the AUV at work. Really a fascinating piece of equipment. The potential, of course, for these too, from a maritime archaeology perspective and finding shipwrecks is really, really something. A lot of these ships that are just still missing out in the vastness of the lake, you can just send one of these out there and let it, you know, search a grid and come back, and you know, you don't have to deploy a boat that gets gallons to the mile. So
Right.
someday, hopefully, these will come down in price. I think. I don't want to say what they paid, but
Yeah, it's not cheap for certainly, like, and this is a small, you know, it's a small one. They have different things that you can attach to them, right? They have different payloads that make them more expensive or less expensive. They're really useful, and I think it's one of those things that, yeah, they're gonna come down eventually. Be within the realm of what underwater archaeologists can afford.
yeah, definitely. And Michigan Tech is a really excellent research institution. Even now, I think they're making a lot of inroads up there using, you know, their technology into Great Lakes environmental technology and studying the lakes. So, you know, I'm a big fan, of course, of Michigan Tech, but particularly their hockey team.
Oh yeah.
In any event, so I think that's all of our images. It is. So for those of you in the audience, you know, who aren't familiar with the type of underwater archaeology that's going on in Lake Huron, I think Dr. Lemke has given a really excellent overview of what's going on there. And Ashley, any plans to do any kind of work in Lake Michigan of this sort?
Yes. So the plan for now, which is really wonderful, I actually just got an internal grant through the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee to support a new project in Lake Michigan. So the plan is to take a lot of the methods that we've talked about here, and then a lot of those techniques that we've developed slowly, you know, over the last decade in Lake Huron, and apply them to some of our shallow waters in Lake Michigan and see if we can't find some indigenous archaeology. So shipwrecks are wonderful, and they're really fascinating. They're these, you know, historical snapshots, and I always think of them as just the tip of the iceberg of what might be below the Great Lakes, whether they're, you know, they're Huron or Michigan or the others. So I'm going to start working in Lake Michigan really soon. The project kicks off on July 1st, so stay tuned for more.
Excellent. That's really exciting. I'm really eager to hear the results. I mean, we can have you back sometime in the fall or in the spring to talk more about what your successes are there.
Yeah.
Um, Couple of quick housekeeping things before we go. One of the projects that we have coming up for the WUAA is a field school that we're going to be doing on June 1st at the Wisconsin Maritime Museum, where we will be doing a side scan survey of a portion of Maritime Bay, looking for vessel remains that are known to be in the area, and we'll be demonstrating the use of an archaeological side scan sonar to create a bottom map, a mosaic of the bottom that we'll then put onto Google Earth and interpret the material out there. Then we'll have a classroom portion where we review that field work. So if anybody's interested in participating, we still have a few seats left. We have a good sized 42-foot trawler that we'll be working on with a big television, flat panel television screen so everyone can see the side scan as we go by. If There is a nominal fee just due to the gas cost, but we
Mhm.
also have a tuition stipend for students who may not be available to afford it. So if you're interested in that, you can contact me at brendan@shipwreck.info. It sounds shipwreck.info. So, well, Ashley, thank you so much for being our inaugural guest. The work you're doing there is fascinating. I can't wait to hear more about what you find in Lake Michigan.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. And everybody, tune in next month. We will have another fascinating guest. I will be announcing it. If you're a WUA member, you will get the announcement in our monthly member update. And if you're not a WUA member, well, you should consider joining. It's only $20 a month. All right. Have a good night, everybody. And thanks again, Ashley.